Hi guys, Dan Vogel here. I want to give you a brief lesson on how to draw glass and metal. So it's not just going to be glass and metal. In our drawing, what we are going to do is compare and contrast several different textures and objects against one another to help us understand better how glass and metal can be revealed in a drawing or painting or photograph or things like that. So what are the characteristics that are making glass and metal appear to us as being those things? And what we're talking about here essentially is a visual element, and that element is texture. Talking about the texture, the way it feels, the way it looks. We've got glass, we've got the texture of metal, we've got the texture of solid objects. And what is a solid? Well, a solid is just like a ball or a cone or something like that that we've been practicing for a while now. So solids, the glass and metal, not really that much different, but there's a couple little tricks that we can employ to help us depict those things easily. And then pattern also is, in my opinion, falls under a kind of category of texture. And for this case, we're just going to use a very graphic pattern that has a sharp edge. And so that's the main aspect of pattern that I want you to understand, is that it has sharp edges. So when we talk about sharp edges on pattern, it's essentially saying, hey, put a line around that thing. It's going to be okay to define the edges of what will become stripes. You'll see this here in just a minute. So what I'm going to do is use a little bit of simple perspective knowledge to help me draw something from my memory and my imagination. So what I'm doing is using a ruler to mark off 2-inch intervals here across the baseline of a rectangle. I just drew that rectangle freehand, and that's what I would like you to practice doing, but you could also use a ruler for this exercise. So next I need to choose a vanishing point, which in our case is probably going to be up above the horizon. Is going to be on the horizon, and it's going to be up above our table. It might even be out of our frame. So I'm going to choose a vanishing point that's just here. It's actually, I'm choosing it as much for compositional purposes as for being realistic per se. But so I'm just going to put a vanishing point here somewhere at the top of my frame at about 1/3. I just want to connect these orthogonals, or these depth lines, off to that vanishing point. So I start to form a pattern, a simple pattern, and that's what we're dealing with right now. And this is, by the way, 6B General's charcoal. On newsprint. I can kind of figure out what maybe some of these other pieces of stripe might look like over here by extending my baseline. I don't need to draw that, but it can help me establish a pattern here on the tabletop that will become kind of like it's going to be the ground plane that we're used to, but instead of just being a white ground plane, it's going to have a pattern on it as well. So what I would usually do here is probably actually start to mass in a little bit of light value on some of the alternating stripes. So I'm just massing in about that same kind of light value that you would be using. It's about a 25% gray. It's kind of like, for me right now, I'm just trying to keep it light, but you can see as I get that tone in there, things really solidify quickly, and it starts to look very quickly like a table or some space. This is just an eraser. And so that's the idea, you know, that one takeaway here is, you know, shade in some, draw the outline of your patterns that you see, and I want you to catch those in your large drawing. I want you to look at that pattern carefully and really capture the essence of it. But the formula is really similar. This is just as straightforward as it can get. But what I'm suggesting is that you use some light and precise outlines to outline the edges of the color changes, and then you start to quickly and early on in your drawing start to assign which stripes are going to be light or which stripes are going to be dark. Don't go all the way, just you can see even just a little bit of color right there really starts to bring that into focus. So what you're going to do is you're going to find a design that has at least one of each of those things, and we'll use those elements to compare and contrast, and it will help us identify the characteristics of what is making that object look like itself. Well, I'm just going to get started. So what I want to do here is to depict or to draw a couple of simple objects, kind of like maybe you would find in our classroom here on the tabletop. So it's kind of a, you know, a nice little game. I can lay out this tabletop, and then I can put stuff on it. This glass of metal is, I think, is one of my favorite drawings of the semester. It's one of those assignments where I think a lot of people really finally starting to get the hang of some of the drawing process and some of the things that we've been thinking about for so long, and things can really start to click with this assignment for sure. And you might be really pleasantly amazed actually at how quickly and readily you can start to depict some pretty lifelike textures in charcoal. So this is just a pink eraser that I've sharpened up with a razor blade that I've shown you in previous videos. But so what I want to do next, I need something else. I've got something that's going to become glass. I've got something that's going to become metal. And I still need something that'll be solid, and of course I have the pattern. That was one of the first things that I put in there. So I'm going to put something in this glass fish bowl, like a piece of fruit. I could also put another object, you know, maybe just like a small ball or something like that over here. So the reasoning behind these solids is that what that's going to do is it's going to let us perceive, you know, the characteristics of glass, to be able to see something inside of a glass, or conversely, actually to be able to see something here get reflected into a shiny surface that's kind of like a mirror. So it's really pretty cool, and you're going to start to, your eyes are going to open up, you know, you see these pictures that, you know, start to work with these things, and you're going to see this stuff, and it's going to be cool because, you know, you'll have a lot of the skills necessary to start to try to draw those shapes and spaces that are going on here. So what I encourage you to do is to sort of think about the interiors of the glass and the metal as like a little microcosm or a little drawing in and of itself. So it's like a frame within a frame. So that the world on the outside of the glass, you know, you're going to draw that separately and differently, and with kind of maybe a different mindset than you would approach the stuff that's happening on the interior of the objects. This is just a chamois. It works pretty good for this kind of idea, but what I'm going to do is take that chamois and actually sort of erase the insides of my objects so that I have kind of like a more of a blank slate in there. And that's also depositing just a little bit of tone, a little bit of value that it helps things to again start to solidify pictorially in the frame. You know, what we're doing is we're depositing a little bit of mass, or sometimes what we call our mid-tone. And that mid-tone is like the substance that stuff is made out of. So it's not a bad thing that we're getting a little bit of color embedded right there in the interiors of our shapes. It's actually just what we want. And this is an eraser, and I can use that to you know, trim up things and kind of refine some of the edges and outlines, etc. So after I do erase on the inside, I have opportunity now to redraw, reselect what I can see. So I want to go back and get started on what should happen on the inside. This is just a paper towel, white paper towel. Just going to use that to reduce some of the dust, and it also is brushing in, pushing in some of my charcoal marks so that they're not as prominent, but they're nicely embedded into the fibers of the page. Very important for me to, you know, you don't want to have a lot of mess or powder when you're drawing, so a paper towel is a good way to kind of reduce some of that. And I don't really mind too much, actually. I kind of prefer it. A lot of times it's something that gets lightly swiped over with the towel, pushed in so that it's not powdery and loose and doing unpredictable things. Anyway, let's get back here. So on the inside of the glass, the question is, what do you see? Glass has three main traits that I want to teach you to look for. Transparency, reflection, refraction. If you can identify those things and understand what they are, you'll start to be able to depict glass very, very convincingly. What's going on with the metal? Metal has a dark mid-tone. Bright highlights. Even darker shadows. What else is going on in a polished piece of metal or a mirror? Well, you're seeing a direct reflection. And it's going to follow the curvature of the form. So if we have a curved surface, it's a curved mirror, you're going to see some kind of bending and bowing, but it's really going to be a very logical depiction of what's happening right there on the interior of that object. Glass, on the other hand, has some layering that has to happen. So metal is very direct. You can basically draw what you see. Glass, on the other hand, requires you to layer up your marks, and to be okay sometimes with having some things that are thicker in places and thinned out in other places, and so we need to be able to play with the transparency of our materials in order to depict things that are clear. Let's get started. So here on the inside, my first rule is that whatever you're drawing on the inside of the glass has to be substantially different than what's going on the outside. So this is cool because it lets you actually, it frees you up. If you know that what you draw on the inside has to be a little bit heightened or exaggerated, then you can invent, and you can also start to predict and understand how stuff's going to work. So what is that invention that lets me break into this thing and have some fun with it? Well, it's refraction. Refraction is a kind of distortion. It's about bending and things that are getting warped. So when I see something sitting inside of the glass, I don't want to draw it as a sort of a straightforward thing, but I'll start to bend it around and play around with some of its outline, some of its contour. Do something to it that is going to fracture or fragment our perception of what's happening inside of that shape. So that maybe is going to turn into a ball or a piece of fruit, but what I'm doing here is saying, hey, look, that edge is probably getting messed around with by some of the thickness and the nature of the glass as I'm looking through it. Incidentally, as glass gets thicker, it's probably going to get darker. Okay, so here again, I've got my stripes, and they're coming up to the edge of my glass tank. So what I want to do is, I'm going to look at my source material, of course, but I want to have it in my mind that I can't make a direct connection between the shape of the stripe on the outside of the glass and the shapes of the stripes on the inside of the glass. And same thing with this page division edge. When I get to the edge of the fishbowl here, I want to do something that lets my, this shape here is also in flux. I'm changing the size of things a little bit as I work. But when I get to the edge here, I want to be able to say, hey, look, the inside of that thing is a totally different world than what's happening on the outside. So I'm going to skip a little place here and sort of offset or move my page division line inside of the fishbowl down or up or whatever I see, and make it a little bit warped. So that it's not a direct connection to what's happening on the outside of the tank. And same thing with all the stripes or anything else that you might be seeing through the glass. You want to sort of use it's okay to use a little bit of imagination to help you draw the stuff inside of glass and inside of metal too, to some extent. You have to use a lot of imagination. There's no way around it. I'm looking at something, but I also have this very healthy sort of dose of making it up or heightening that reality just a little bit so that it comes into focus for my viewers. And so this is just 6B charcoal. It's my fingertips. I encourage you to learn how to draw with a piece of charcoal stick, a piece of chalk. It's an ancient technique and tradition, and it has a lot of benefits. It has a lot of benefits over a pencil. One of the main ones is that it's a broader piece. You can still get a nice sharp point onto it, but it's going to let you lay that material down on the side or blend it out a little more readily. So I am very, very specifically, asking you to try drawing with a stick right from the start. Just get it in your mind that's okay. It feels a little clumsy at first, but that's what I'm doing. That's the way to go. It's about drawing with the crayon. I said, it's an ancient skill, and you should embrace it. So you need to pardon me. I got to pause here and put a point on this thing again, which is that's just part of the workflow. Sometimes you got to pause a little bit. All right, so what I got here is I worked on the transparency. I could see something through there. And I worked on some of the refraction, which is the bending and the bowing and the distorting of that table edge and the stripes inside of the fish tank. And I said also refraction is where glass is thicker. So one thing I'm going to do here is just darken up some of the thick parts of the glass. So it's like, imagine it's not even glass, it's just something solid. One hang up beginners often have with drawing glass is they think they're not supposed to press hard on it because it's clear, and that's just not true. When you're drawing glass, you need to have a lot of line quality. You need to be able to figure out where your edges are. And there's going to be points in the glass that are actually so dark, surprisingly dark, that you see them on a value scale. They're almost all the way to black. So that stuff is going to happen. Dark parts, glass going to happen where it's in shadow, of course, but also where the glass is getting thicker. So one thing that we can say pretty confidently about glass is that it looks light against dark and dark against light. Just going to write that down, and then I'm going to move along and we can think about it. That's really saying is that glass has a kind of mid-tone value. It has a base color, and a problem that beginners often face is they don't want to get the surface area of the glass toned in to the right color. They keep it too light, afraid that it's not going to look right if somehow their coloring gets on there. But look, I've actually just eliminated just with my fingertips lightly. I'm not trying to change any shapes. What I'm trying to do is embed just a little bit of tone into that form, and that's the tone that's causing it to hang together. And so glass needs that base color, that mid-tone value to support the information that you're trying to depict. So anyway, look, it's going to look dark against light. So down here against a light tablecloth, that glass is going to register as being very dark. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and put some cast shadows on here. If we had some shadows on these objects, you might be seeing some, sit cores or shadows like on the inside of that tank that are registering as almost black. So glass is going to look dark against a lighter color. Okay? Even if that color, this is where the layering stuff starts to come in, and it's fun for me, but beginners find it, of course, This is why we're doing it. It's challenging. But what's starting to happen is we've got all that stuff starting to accumulate right there. Got a lot of information. We need a shadow, then we need a dark stripe in a shadow, and then we have a new texture that we're trying to master, putting that on top. A reflection is a highlight or something that you can see sitting on the surface. Now here's the interesting thing about glass is that you're going to see that reflection not just on one surface but actually on two surfaces. Because you got the inside of the tank and then you got the outside of the tank, and you got the highlight that might be occurring on the other surface on the inside of the tank. So you're not wrong. You look at glass, highlight on glass, and you actually see a sort of a double image. It's because you're seeing reflections on multiple surfaces. And you know, if we were a computer, you know, we could just know for sure how to plot all the light and reflections and stuff. But what artists do is we look at it, we estimate, we use our ideas about perspective and geometry and angles and all other kinds of clues, and we start to piece these things together. And you know, as you develop these things and you draw more, you get better at kind of hitting more of the parts, getting them in place, so that you're making something that seems kind of convincing. Well, so now I do have all my parts in place. I've got my transparency, I got my reflections, I've got my refractions. Incidentally, refraction is the bending, but it's also that same effect that's trapping light, making the thick glass look darker. It's also what's responsible for looking light against dark, dark against light. But what I haven't done yet is shown you how to go light against dark. So how does that work? Well, that's what space tone is good for. Okay, I'm just gonna cut in. I'll turn my picture here. It's a little easier for me to reach. What I'm doing, I'm going to cut in. Cutting in means I'm going to take that square, sharp side of my chalk and put it right up against the outline of my picture, and I can cut in up against that edge. And the benefit is what I'm doing is I'm cutting a sharp edge in up against my object, and all the way around that object it's got a soft edge that I can blend and feather and fade into space tone color in the background. See that? So now, with just a couple of little swipes, I've started to express that the glass is also looking light against dark. Okay, so what are we doing? Dark against light, light against dark. It's always a reversal of contrast sometimes to get those effects that you're really looking for. This is just an eraser. Go in and lift some brightness out of these highlights. Okay, other things I have to do with glass is I'm going to be swiping the edges of it frequently with my eraser or my blending stick or even my charcoal, you know. So what's going on out there in my estimation is that there's just a lot of little skinny shapes that are hard for the eyes to depict and record. But I've found over time that, you know, artists can just take some brush strokes and swipe at, you know, the edges of glass, and having a little bit of activity out there that is kind of softens the edge, but also sort of solidifies the values too at the same time, helps to bring that object into focus.